I transmigrated into the family's real young master and was bound to a compete for favor and slap-in-the-face system. System warning. You must win back familial and romantic affection, or be eliminated. I adopted a Buddhist-esque laid-back attitude, ignoring the fake young master's provocations. The whole family treated me like air. My fiancé humiliated me publicly. A hillbilly can't turn into a phoenix. The system suddenly disappeared, and I let out a long breath, finally free. Mother, however, started bringing breakfast. Father shoved a black card in my hand, and my eldest brother stayed up late to have heart-to-heart talks. The fake young master roared, "What kind of witchcraft did you use?" At my birthday banquet, I announced my departure, and the whole family instantly had tears in their eyes. Consciousness rose from the wreck like a ship surfacing through cold sea, jolted awake by the dazzling light of a crystal chandelier. "Ethan? Ethan? What are you dazing out for?" A sharp female voice pierced my eardrums. I blinked, and the blurry double images in my vision gradually came into focus. The living room was outrageously luxurious, the air thick with the cloying scent of expensive fragrance. A well-groomed, exquisitely made-up woman stood before me, her brows arched and her face full of impatience as she stared at me. Behind her on the sofa sat a composed, imposing middle-aged man, a stern young man, and a boy in a white shirt with a clean, gentle bearing, the latter looking over with just the right amount of concern. Countless unfamiliar fragments of memory surged into my mind like a flood unleashed, accompanied by a violent headache. Ethan, 18 years old, just brought back from a remote small town to the top-tier Johnson family. The true heir who has been recognized and returned to his roots. A cannon fodder character who lives inside a book and is mocked by fate. Ding. Host consciousness detected awakening. Competition, slap in the face, counterattack system successfully bound. Ultimate mission released. Reclaim all familial love, romance, and status that truly belong to the rightful heir Ethan. Expose the fake heir Noah. Seduce the heroine Sophia Taylor. Mission failure. Soul annihilation. A cold, emotionless electronic voice rang directly in the depths of my mind. I stared at all this luxury that felt icy, and my nominal mother Claire's undisguised disdain, and my father George's scrutinizing, merchandise-like gaze, and my eldest brother Lucas's unfathomable indifference, and at the faint, hardly perceptible glint of smugness and pity in the fake heir Noah's eyes. An indescribable weariness spread from the depths of my soul, instantly drowning the confusion of having just transmigrated into a book and the system's death threat. In my past life, I kept grinding and scheming, barely clawed my way out, and then a car accident sent me to my death. In this life, keep grinding, dragged into this wealthy family's melodramatic whirlpool to fight over that fake kinship and love, only to be erased afterward. Screw the mission. Screw being erased. I just wanted to lie flat and do nothing. Did you hear that? Tomorrow Noah's friends are coming over. If you're fine, stay in your room and don't come out to make a fool of yourself. Claire's tone grew nastier when I didn't reply. Noah spoke up at the right moment, his voice gentle, soothing. "Mom, don't talk to him like that. He just got back and isn't used to it yet." He turned to me, smiling innocently. "Ethan, they're all rowdy friends tomorrow. If you're worried about the noise, just rest." System warning. Detected Noah's hypocritical provocation. Host must counterattack immediately. Defend your dignity. Otherwise, initial points will be deducted. Points reset triggers punishment. The electronic voice in my head was sharp and grating. I looked at Noah's practically perfect face, filled with genuine concern, then at Claire, whose expression had softened slightly because of his words but was still impatient. I tugged at the corner of my mouth. "Oh," I replied with a single sound, my voice even and flat, like commenting on the nice weather today. "Got it." Having said that, I didn't even bother to look at them again. Dragging my still heavy, unfamiliar body, I walked straight past the family with their varied expressions and headed for the servant's room assigned to me in my memory, located in the most remote corner of the villa. My back screamed, "Don't mess with me." The living room fell into an eerie, deathly silence. Claire's well-maintained face twisted slightly with anger. George's brows furrowed even deeper, his gaze sharp. A faint trace of surprise flickered across Lucas's cold eyes. On Noah's perfectly smiling face, for the first time, there was an extremely slight, almost undetectable crack of stiffness. Warning: hostile negligence detected. Deducting 10 points. Current points, -10. Please take immediate positive action. Otherwise, the punishment mechanism will activate. A system alarm in my mind was blaring like crazy. Punishment? I pushed open the narrow, sparsely furnished, slightly musty door and collapsed onto the stiff single bed. The feel of a soft down comforter belonged to another life. My body was exhausted, my mind even more so. The system's sharp buzzing was like background noise. Shut up. I mouthed words in my head, pulled up the thin blanket that smelled of cheap laundry detergent, and covered my head. Darkness and silence wrapped around me. Who cares about point penalties? Who cares about erasure? Let me sleep until I pass out first. The days just slip by like that. Like a drop of oil falling into boiling water, silent and out of place. The system in my mind went from frantic warnings, screams, and point deductions my negative score had already broken through the ceiling, to breathless exasperation, threats, and intimidation, and finally, it seemed fatigue, left with only a faint, intermittent buzz of electric noise. I perfectly played the role of an invisible heir of a wealthy family. Noah's friends threw a pool party, laughter everywhere. I closed that terribly soundproof window, put in earplugs, and read a novel. The Johnsons held a grand charity gala. Perfume and silk, the elite gathered. I, citing feeling unwell, stayed in my room gnawing on bread. Noah accidentally broke that cheap foreign-style antique vase my mother Claire cherished, and the servants immediately turned their suspicious eyes on me, the clumsy true heir. I couldn't be bothered to lift an eyelid, and simply pointed at the high-definition surveillance camera in the corner of the living room. Noah's expression shifted slightly. Claire opened her mouth, but in the end, under George's displeased glance, she sulked and gave up. ZZZ, demotion, punishment, ZZZ, the system static weekly protested. I rolled over and went back to sleep. Even the way the servant Martha looked at me had changed. From initial wariness and a barely perceptible disdain, slowly turning to numbness, and finally even taking on a hint of incomprehensible pity. They probably thought this true heir might really have something wrong with his head. Until that day, the eve of Noah's birthday banquet, Sophia arrived. She was Noah's fiancée, the sun and moon heroine idolized by all in this melodramatic novel, and the white moonlight Ethan had longed for in his past life. The one he couldn't have, who ultimately turned love into hatred and met her doom. She was like a carefully cultivated rose, carrying innate pride and superiority, and accompanied by Noah, she walked into the villa. "Noah, I've picked out your birthday suit for you. It's Italian bespoke, guaranteed to make you the most dazzling prince in the room." Her voice was bright, laced with saccharine intimacy. Her gaze swept over me, sitting on the sofa in the far corner of the living room, wearing a t-shirt washed pale and bent over scrolling old stories on a foreign news app, and in those pretty apricot eyes a trace of contempt showed plainly. "Oh, so this is the new brother?" She deliberately lengthened her tone, feigning surprise as if she had only just noticed me. "Why are you sitting here alone? How boring." Noah put a considerate arm around her shoulder, smiling gently. "Sophia, Ethan is more introverted. He likes quiet." "Quiet," Sophia snorted, as if she'd heard a joke. Her lacquered fingertips touched her painted lips, her eyes darting with merciless mockery. "I think he's just no account, right? A hill chicken is a hill chicken. Stick a few feathers on it, and it still won't become a phoenix." "Noah, don't you think so?" She tilted her head with an innocent cruelty, looking at Noah. Noah's smile remained perfect, his gaze indulgent as he looked at her, neither admitting nor denying. That tacit posture itself, was a silent humiliation. The air in the entire living room seemed to freeze. The servants held their breath, watching their noses and holding their tongues. Claire was upstairs and hadn't come down. George and Lucas didn't seem to be home. Only me, like a stubborn reef, standing firm in the tide formed by Sophia's malicious gaze and Noah's hypocritical gentleness. ZZZ, severe provocation. ZZZ, female, lead humiliation. ZZZ, must retaliate. ZZZ, annihilation warning. Highest level. ZZZ, deep in my mind, the system's electronic voice, which had been silent for a long time, burst out like a dying, struggling beast with an unprecedentedly sharp shriek and chaotic electrical noise, frantically assaulting my nerves and bringing pain like needles. A red warning light flashed wildly in the depths of my consciousness. Annihilate. Two cold words, carrying the scent of destruction. The body's instincts seemed to be triggered. Her fingertips curled slightly. Counterattack? Like Ethan in the original book, raging, leaping up like a buffoon to argue, only to have Nodo Dangshi Lyd fuse it, to be mocked by everyone and looked down on even more by Sophia. Still follow the system's instructions. Go face slap them. Go seduce them. The agony intensified, my consciousness seeming to be ripped apart by that red light. I slowly lifted my head. My gaze calmly pierced the lavish air of the living room and landed on Sophia's pretty face, written all over with superiority and malice. A triumphant, mocking smile still lingered at the corner of her mouth. Noah narrowed his eyes slightly, as if waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to lose control, waiting for me to once again cement the reputation of being vulgar and disgraceful in front of everyone. Time seemed to stretch. 1 second, 2 seconds. Just as the system's piercing erasure warning reached its peak, the red light almost ready to devour all consciousness. Oh, I opened my mouth. My throat was a bit dry for not speaking for a long time. The sound I made was very soft, very faint like a falling feather. Got it, I said. Then, under the gaze of everyone, Sophia, Noah, and the servants watching from the shadows, that instant froze, incredulous, as if they had seen a ghost. I slowly, deliberately, lowered my head again. My gaze fell back on my cracked screen, outdated secondhand phone. My fingers slid. The screen lit up, continued scrolling through that silly news about an unidentified, glowing object found in the suburbs of Jing City. It felt as if that vicious humiliation directed at me just now had been nothing more than an insignificant gust passing through the hall. It had blown past, and then it just dispersed. The living room was deathly silent. Sophia's perfect, maliciously gleeful smile froze completely, like a cheap mask, cracking inch by inch. Her lips, glossed and neat, parted slightly as if to say something, but not a single word came out. Only shock and a trace of overwhelming embarrassment for being utterly ignored. The look of scheming triumph in Noah's eyes froze in an instant. The hand he had slung over Sophia's shoulder unconsciously tightened, knuckles paling. He stared at me intently. On that warm, jade-like face, for the first time a clear fissure appeared, revealing underneath genuine, incredulous astonishment and a hint of offended gloom. The servants dared not breathe, their eyes full of absurdity and bewilderment. Gee, deep in his mind, that frenzied shriek, the system's electronic voice flashing a destructive red light, suddenly rose to an unimaginable, soul-wrenching extreme frequency, like a string tightened to its breaking point. Ching! A piercing, ear-splitting sharp blast, as if it could pierce the entire universe. Then, and it stopped abruptly. All the noise, all the warning red lights, all the cold sense of oppression, as if an invisible giant hand had instantly snuffed them out. In my conscious world, I fell into an unprecedented, deathly blank silence. Silence. Absolute silence. No buzzing of electricity. No annoying task prompts. No threats of erasure. As if all my internal organs had been hollowed out, leaving only one enormous void, weightless hollow. I kept my head bowed. My fingertips still rested on the phone's cold screen. The headline about the luminous object danced in my blurred vision. A few seconds later, an indescribable, enormous sense of relief after surviving a calamity exploded from the deepest part of my soul like a tsunami. In an instant, it swept through my limbs and every bone. Every cell was screaming as it released. The feeling was so intense, so overwhelming, that my body trembled uncontrollably. A hot rush shot straight into my eyes. I inhaled sharply. The breath carried the scent of freedom, an unprecedented sweetness. Then, a voice incredibly clear and filled with immense relief and release escaped uncontrollably and softly from my dry throat. Finally, free. Her voice was very quiet, but it was like a boulder smashing through the suffocating dead silence in the parlor. Sophia's face went completely dark. Noah's pupils suddenly contracted, and he grabbed Sophia's hand hard, his knuckles making a faint crack. Freedom? What was he talking about? A useless person taken back by the Johnson family who lives worse than a servant. What right does he have to talk about freedom? Why can he put on such a look of relief, as if he had just set down a 1,000-pound burden? A surge of intense unease and inexplicable agitation seized Noah's heart more clearly than ever before. He felt the carefully controlled situation he had managed seemed to be torn open by this true heir he had never taken seriously, in a way completely beyond his understanding. Wind poured in through that opening, cold and bone-piercing. I had completely become a transparent person in the Johnson family. Or rather, I had made myself an heir. In the world after the system disappeared, even that narrow servant's room seemed unusually spacious and bright. Breathing was free, and time was free too. I no longer had to deal with anyone, nor did I have to care about any gazes. Every day, I slept until I woke naturally, went to the kitchen to find something to eat, usually the cold rice and dishes Martha had tacitly left. Then returned to my room to read, or strolled to the little neglected garden behind the villa, sat on the stone bench to sun myself and daze, watching aunts move house for an entire afternoon. Noah's grand birthday banquet took place as scheduled. The villa was brightly lit, luxury cars gathered, elegant clothes, and styled hair everywhere. Laughter and cheer floated over even from afar. I closed the window tightly, put in earplugs, wrapped myself in a thin quilt, and slept soundly. The noise of the party had nothing to do with me. The glory of the Johnson family had nothing to do with me. Those remarks, some curious, some disdainful, some pitying, had nothing to do with me either. The next morning, dawn had just begun to break. My biological clock woke me up on time. My stomach was a bit hungry. I crept downstairs, planning to go to the kitchen to find something to fill my stomach. The large living room still bore traces of last night's revelry. A few suspicious wine stains dotted the expensive Persian rug, and the air was thick with the sweet, cloying, muddled scent of champagne and perfume. I walked straight through the mess without looking away. I had just reached the restaurant door. My steps came to a halt. Beside the restaurant's huge, long dining table that could seat over a dozen people, Claire was standing with her back to me. She wore a soft silk loungewear set, her hair casually pinned up, her makeup removed, showing a trace of fatigue and an uncommon gentleness. On the dining table in front of her sat a delicate bone china tray. On the tray was a breakfast that looked prepared with considerable care. Toast baked to a golden crisp, soft-boiled eggs, and bacon cooked perfectly, a few slices of fresh fruit salad, and a steaming cup of milk. This obviously wasn't prepared to the servant's usual standard. Claire seemed hesitant. Her fingers unconsciously twisted the hem of her loungewear. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself, picked up the tray, and turned around. Then, she saw me standing in the doorway of the dining room. Their eyes met. The air froze instantly. Claire's expression was extremely complicated. For a moment, there was awkwardness, a barely perceptible fluster, and a deeper, ineffable emotion surging in the depths of her well-kept eyes. The fingers holding the tray showed the slightest whitening at the knuckles from the strain. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. Maybe it was an explanation, maybe an order, maybe something else. I didn't give her a chance to speak. My gaze calmly slid from her face down to the overly delicate breakfast in her hands. He paused for a second. Then I expressionlessly looked away, as if I didn't see her at all, nor the breakfast. I walked straight past her, heading with purpose toward the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator door. Inside, as expected, were the steamed buns Martha had prepared earlier, wrapped in cling film, and a small dish of pickles. I took them out and, with practiced ease, put them into the microwave to heat. Ding! The microwave's beeper sounded especially jarring in the quiet restaurant. Claire still stood stiffly where she was, holding the breakfast no one had taken, like a forgotten statue. Her complexion looked a little pale in the morning light, and the emotions swirling in her eyes finally settled into a heavy, wounded, confused blankness. I took out the heated steamed bun and pickled vegetables, found a chair in the corner, and sat down to eat quietly. The steamed bun was a bit dry and hard. The pickled vegetables were unbearably salty, but I ate with great focus, as if it were the most delicious delicacy in the world. Claire stood for a long time. In the end, she quietly, with slightly slow movements, put that delicate breakfast back on the dining table. She didn't look at me again. She turned and left the dining room with somewhat heavy steps. That lonely breakfast in the spacious and luxurious dining room gave off an enticing aroma, yet felt particularly ironic and desolate. A few days later, dinner time, the atmosphere in the dining room remained heavy. At the head of the long table sat George, staring at a financial newspaper with his brow tightly furrowed. Claire sat beside him, listlessly stirring the soup in her bowl. Lucas expressionlessly cut his steak. Noah, wearing his usual gentle smile, occasionally said a few appropriate words to liven things up, but to little effect. I sat at the far end, the furthest from them, with only a bowl of white rice and a plate of greens in front of me, quietly picking at my food. Suddenly, a thin card, gleaming with a metallic chill, was pushed beside my rice bowl by two knuckled fingers. The action was abrupt, carrying an unquestionable forcefulness. I looked up. It's Lucas. He had at some point put down his knife and fork. His body leaned slightly forward, cutting across the long dining table, and those deep, icy eyes were now staring at me across the surface of the table without blinking. The usual scrutiny and indifference were gone. Instead, something extremely complex stirred within them. Something even he might not fully understand. Curiosity, puzzlement, and a trace of an offended agitation. Take it. His voice was low, carrying an imperative tone that brooked no contradiction. The password is your birthday. I lowered my head and looked at the black card lying next to the bowl of white rice. There were no bank logos on it, only an extremely understated gold foil emblem in the lower right corner that nonetheless signified unlimited overdraft. The Johnson family's black card, a privilege pass symbolizing supreme status and wealth. The restaurant fell terrifyingly silent in an instant. George put down the newspaper, his keen gaze sweeping over the card, then landing on Lucas and me. His brow furrowed even deeper, but he didn't speak at once. Claire's hand froze mid-stir of her spoon. She looked at Lucas in astonishment, then at me. Noah's gentle, warm smile vanished completely for the first time. The fingers holding his fork and knife tightened abruptly, his knuckles turning a pale, bluish white from the strain. His gaze was fixed like a nail on that glaring black card, and deep in his eyes surged a storm of shock, disbelief, and a streak of murderous fury born from being utterly enraged. Why? This loser, the true heir whom everyone ignored and whom he had toyed with at will. How could he get Lucas's black card? Lucas, has he gone mad? Jealousy and rage gnawed at his heart like venomous snakes. I withdrew my gaze and returned it to my own bowl. I reached out with my chopsticks. I picked up a mouthful of greens, put it in her mouth. I chewed slowly. Swallow. Then, she lifted the bowl and scraped the last few grains of rice clean from the bottom. She set down the bowl and chopsticks. The whole process was quiet and natural. It was as if that black card, capable of driving countless people mad, were nothing more than an eyesore. A napkin carelessly dropped on the table. I stood up. The chair legs scraped the marble floor, making a faint sound. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't reach for the black card that lay so close, emitting its alluring glow. Turned around, walked straight out of the restaurant, leaving behind a deathly silence. And on the table, that black card, completely ignored, lying alone by the edge of the bowl. Noah suddenly bowed his head, hiding the hatred and madness that threatened to burst from his eyes. Late at night, all was silent. Only the occasional distant chirping of insects could be heard outside the window. I lay on the narrow bed, eyes open, staring at the blurred outline of the ceiling. After the system disappeared, my sleep quality actually worsened. Memories from my past life and the absurdity after transmigrating into a book replayed silently like film clips in the dark. Knock, knock, knock. A very light knocking sound rang out. It carried a hesitance and cautiousness. I frowned. At this hour, in this corner, who would come? Ethan. A deliberately lowered, somewhat hoarse male voice came from outside the door. It was Lucas. I sat up, neither turning on the light nor responding. Darkness is the best shield. Lucas outside the door didn't seem to expect a response either. After a few seconds of silence, that low voice came through the door, sounding somewhat abrupt in the still night. That card, it meant nothing else. He paused for a moment, as if arranging his words, and his voice carried a rare, unpracticed, explanatory tone. The Johnson family will not mistreat you. Silence again. The night wind blew through the window gap, making a faint whimpering sound. You? Lucas's voice sounded again, this time with a deeper, barely perceptible confusion and agitation. What do you actually want? Want what? In the darkness, I silently tugged at the corner of my mouth. Freedom. Complete, unbound freedom, not restrained by anyone or anything. That's all. Those outside the door clearly couldn't understand that answer. Another long silence. The air seemed to freeze. At last, a barely audible sigh came from outside the door. Footsteps sounded, then gradually faded away. They disappeared at the end of the corridor. Silence returned outside the door. I lay down again and closed my eyes. Everything about the Johnson family felt like a vast, magnificent, and cold whirlpool. Claire's breakfast, marked by hurt and confusion. Lucas's hard, awkward black card and his late-night interrogations. And George. Though he remained silent, when his gaze occasionally swept over me, it was no longer the purely appraising indifference it had been at first. Instead, there was a faint, barely noticeable, probing, and subtle irritation. The subtle shift in their attitudes was like a pebble thrown into a calm lake. The ripples, though slight, were enough to make some people restless. Those some people were, of course, Noah. The gentle smile on his face grew harder to maintain. The look he gave me, which had at first been disdainful and controlling, had turned into undisguised coldness and envy. The harmonious facade he had carefully constructed was being torn to pieces, bit by bit, by my inaction and my family's inexplicable attention. The silence before the storm is always particularly oppressive, until my nominal birthday arrived. The original owner's, Ethan's, birthday. No one remembered, including myself. If it hadn't been for seeing an exquisitely wrapped bouquet of blue roses, Noah's favorite, in the living room when I came downstairs that morning, and a 3-tier, extravagantly luxurious birthday cake on the dining table with "Happy Birthday, Noah" piped in cream, I would have almost forgotten about it. Oh, right. Noah and I share the same birthday. What a coincidence. It's really ironic. As usual, I bypassed that eye-catching bouquet and the even more eye-catching cake and headed straight for the kitchen. Urgent high-heeled footsteps sounded behind me. Claire chased after me. She seemed to have dressed up specially today, wearing a well-tailored dark green long dress, her makeup refined, but there was a hint of fatigue in her eyes and an almost imperceptible anxiety. "Ethan," she called after me, her voice a bit urgent. I stopped walking and didn't turn around. She hurried around to stand in front of me, holding a modest, even somewhat plain little box. Her expression was complex, with a forced calm and a deeper, embarrassed unease. "Here, take this." She shoved the box into my hands, her movement a little stiff. I didn't take her. The box fell to the floor. Clack! A soft sound. Claire's face turned deathly pale in an instant. She opened her mouth, glanced at the box on the floor, then at my expressionless face. Her voice carried a barely perceptible tremor and hurt. "Today is also your birthday." Her voice grew softer and softer, carrying a weakness she couldn't even convince herself of. I lowered my head and glanced at the small box on the floor. Then I looked up and glanced at the expensive bouquet of blue roses in the living room and the huge cake with the name Noah written on it. Finally, my gaze fell on Claire's face, written all over with embarrassment, helplessness, and a certain kind of hope. I tugged at the corner of my mouth, an extremely indifferent expression, even edged with a hint of mockery. "No need." I slipped past her stiff body and continued on toward the kitchen. From behind came Claire's suppressed, choking inhalation. Dinner time. The atmosphere was heavier than ever before. A huge birthday cake sat in the center of the table like a splendid offering. The servants lit the candles. The warm yellow candlelight flickered, illuminating everyone's faces around the dining table. George sat at the head of the table, his expression solemn. Claire's eyes were slightly red. She kept her head lowered, her fingers unconsciously twisting the napkin. Lucas pressed his lips together, his gaze heavy as it fell on me, carrying scrutiny and an unprecedented gravity. Noah sat diagonally across from me, forcing a proper smile, but his eyes were like poisoned ice needles, fixed on me, the muscles at the corners of his mouth twitching from holding back anger. The sumptuous dishes on the table, that enormous cake, what should have been his moment of glory, felt like an absurd farce, and I was the troublemaker. Everything he had carefully prepared seemed to become a joke. That good-for-nothing. Who does he think he is? The candlelight flickered. Under the scrutiny of everyone's calculating gazes, I picked up my chopsticks. Didn't touch those delicate dishes. Only reached for the plate of stir-fried vegetables closest to me. Picked up a bite with my chopsticks. Put into the bowl. Then, in a suffocating silence, I put down my chopsticks. She lifted her head. My gaze calmly swept across each face at the dining table, each wearing a different expression. Finally, it rested on the flickering candlelight. My voice was not loud, even somewhat flat, yet it clearly pierced the heavy air in the dining room and reached everyone's ears. "After this meal, I'll move out. From then on, nothing to do with each other." Dead silence. Absolute dead silence. Even the crackling of the candle flames was clearly audible. Time seemed to be frozen. Claire jerked her head up, clamped her hand over her mouth, and the slightly reddened eyes filled with tears in an instant, large drops rolling down and smashing onto the plate in front of her. Her shoulders trembled violently, and the look she gave me was filled with immense, unbearable panic and pleading, as if what I announced was not a departure, but some kind of final judgment. George's hand on the table clenched suddenly, his knuckles making a faint crack. On his usually stern, composed face of Fisher appeared for the first time, his gaze roiling with shock, disbelief, and a touch of bewilderment and fury, as if suddenly abandoned. He stared at me intently, his lips pressed into a hard, cold line. Lucas's body tensed instantly, like a leopard ready to spring. The hand he had under the table clenched into a fist, veins bulging on the back of it. In the depths of those cold eyes, a storm rose now, locking onto me with intensity, full of scrutiny and examination, and a thoroughly provoked, icy wrath. "Move out? What's he thinking of doing? Ethan, you." Claire finally couldn't hold back, crying out with a sob in her voice shattered. Bang! A deafening blast violently cut off Claire's cry. The dining table shook violently. Bowls and plates collided, giving off a piercing clatter. "It's Noah." He shot to his feet. The movement was so violent it knocked over the chair behind him, which slammed heavily onto the marble floor. The falsely gentle smile he'd kept all night was utterly shattered. In its place was a contorted, almost maniacal fury and hatred. His eyes were bloodshot, like a beast on the verge of losing control, staring at me intently, his chest heaving, his breathing heavy like bellows. "Move out, as if it has nothing to do with you." His voice was hoarse, warped and distorted by overwhelming rage. Each word seemed squeezed out between his teeth, carrying a strong metallic tang of blood. "Ethan, what the hell are you acting all high and mighty for?" He suddenly thrust his finger toward me, the fingertip trembling violently from the force. "You think you won? You think your pretentious little tricks can fool anyone?" His gaze was like a poison blade, scraping away Claire's tears, sweeping past George's fury, skimming Lucas's cold appraisal, and finally, with a madness bent on destroying everything, driving itself back into my face. "What kind of witchcraft did you use? What on earth did you do to them? Making them, like they're possessed, orbit around you, the useless thing?" He roared hysterically, his voice echoing through the spacious, opulent dining room, harsh and desperate. "Game over? Dream on." A grotesque, wildly ecstatic, destructive smile suddenly twisted across Noah's face. There was not a trace of warmth in that smile, only endless malice and the ferocity of imminent triumph. He suddenly pulled a small black remote from his pocket, about the size of a car key. The thumb pressed down hard. The movement was as quick as lightning, carrying a kind of desperate, all-or-nothing madness. "No!" Claire let out a piercing scream. Lucas sprang to his feet, his gaze sharp as a knife. But it was already too late. On the side of the dining hall, the enormous floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass curtain wall that occupied the entire wall, with its built-in giant high-definition electronic screen, was instantly activated. A blinding white light flashed by. The huge screen lit up. Crystal clear, it projected a scene that made hearts stop. A cold, wet suburban road. The twisted, mangled wreckage of a black sedan. Shattered windshield. The blinding, rotating, flashing ambulance lights dyed the dark night an ominous blood red. In the center of the scene, a thin young man in a white shirt lay motionless on a stretcher, covered in blood, his face as pale as paper. The camera zoomed in. That face. It was startlingly mine. The face from the car accident when I almost died in my past life. The time, the place, the horrific scene, not a single detail was off. A vast, soundless shock of death swept through the entire restaurant like a tsunami in an instant. "This is only the beginning." Noah's hoarse voice, carrying a crazed delight, like a demon's whisper, sounded in the deathly silence. A short, strangled gasp escaped Claire's throat. Her body went suddenly limp as if all her bones had been pulled out, collapsing into the wide seat. Her carefully maintained face instantly drained of color, as white as paper. Her pupils dilated to the limit from extreme fear and shock, fixed on the cruel images on the screen, her lips trembling violently but unable to make a sound. Large teardrops, like beads cut from a string, fell silently, splattering onto the sumptuous silk skirt and soaking into dark stains. George's hand on the dining table clenched abruptly. His knuckles made a teeth-grinding click from the force, veins on the back of his hand bulging like coiling dragons. He felt as if struck hard by an invisible hammer, jerking back against the chair. The face that was usually stern, composed, and in control was now nothing but an ashen, iron-blue pallor and a blank, stunned expression. His eyes bulged, fixed like nails on the screen at that dying face belonging to another Ethan, his chest heaving violently, as if he'd suffocate at any moment. Rage? No. Deep beneath that look was something else. A more profound, cognition-shattering bewilderment and an overwhelming horror, as if the sky were falling in. Lucas reacted most directly. The instant the image lit up, he sprang from his seat like an enraged leopard, launching himself with such speed it whipped up a gust. His cold eyes now burned with a terrifying flame, aimed straight at Noah, who stood at the other end of the table holding the remote, his face still frozen in crazed delight. Lucas wanted to stop him. He wanted to smash that remote. He wanted to strangle this devil. But Noah's hoarse, manic, destruction-delighting low roar, like a poisoned ice spike, pierced the dead silence. This is just the beginning. His voice trembled from extreme excitement and distortion. Each word sounded like a curse crawling out of the abyss of hell. He gripped that little black remote tightly. His knuckles went bluish-white from the force, as if it were the scepter by which he controlled the whole and destroyed his enemies. His originally handsome, gentle face was now twisted with perverse pleasure, looking hideous and terrifying. His blood-red eyes were fixed on me, eager to see my collapse, fear, and a scream torn from my throat. This was his carefully prepared trump card. This was his fatal blow to completely crush this useless true heir, reclaim all attention, and return everything to the right track. He wanted to nail this strange, uncontrollable variable to the pillar of shame as an abnormality, a monster, and an omen of misfortune. In the dining room, only Claire's sobs, suppressed to the extreme, George's heavy, ox-like breathing, Lucas's coiled rage, stalled by caution about collateral damage. And the silent yet heart-stopping images of death on the screen remained. Huge halos of red and blue light, like flames of hell, leapt and flickered across everyone's faces. All eyes bore fear, shock, bewilderment, and anger, and finally, as if drawn by an invisible magnet, they all turned in unison to the center of the storm. Me, the one accused of being an abnormality. I still sat in that chair farthest from everyone. My body hadn't even moved. The image on the screen, that cold moment of death from my past life, reflected my soul now like the clearest mirror. No fear, no panique, not the hysterical breakdown Noah expected. Only a stillness like dead water. A calm so chilling it made one's heart turn cold. Under that suffocating, deadly silence and immense pressure. Under the scrutiny of countless gazes, some terrified, some shocked, some venomous. I slowly lifted my head. My eyes did not turn to the brutal images on the screen. Nor did I look at Noah, who seemed frenzied. Nor did I look at the devastated Claire, the furious George, or the poised Lucas. My gaze seemed to penetrate this luxurious, cold dining room, to pierce the barrier of time and space, and fall into an extremely distant, untouchable void. Then, a voice, exceedingly calm, and even with a hint of strange relief, sounded from my mouth. Not loud, yet clearly drowned out Claire's sobs and George's gasps, like a stone thrown into an icy lake. It shattered that collapsing silence. Yes, I said. The voice was so flat it sounded like stating a fact that had nothing to do with them. That car accident. My gaze finally moved slowly, landing on the huge screen, on the face of the me lying on the stretcher, dying. A 1-second pause. I'm dead. 3 words. Light as a feather. Yet like 3 invisible thunderclaps, they crashed loudly in everyone's ears. Claire's sobs stopped abruptly. She clapped a hand over her mouth and stared at me in disbelief, her eyes full of overwhelming absurdity and a deeper terror. George's face went ashen, the muscles twitching violently, his clenched fist trembling slightly. Lucas's poised body froze suddenly, and for the first time a flash of astonishment and an incredulous confusion swept clearly across his eyes burning with rage. Noah's twisted, gleeful smile, expecting my breakdown, instantly froze. Like a clumsy mask, it solidified on his face. His pupils contracted sharply, staring at me as if truly seeing me for the first time. He had imagined countless reactions from me, denial, excuses, fear, hysteria, but never this calm admission. Those were alive now. My voice continued to speak, still calm. I shifted my gaze away from the screen and slowly swept across every face in the dining room, each distorted by shock. Finally, it settled back onto the hands resting on my knees, the hands belonging to the young body of Ethan. My fingertips lightly brushed the cold tabletop. Just Ethan's shell. Her words fell. The dining room plunged into a kind of deathly silence, even stranger and more chilling than before. The air seemed completely frozen. Even the sound of breathing disappeared. Only the blood-red and blue lights silently flashing on the screen continued to pulse coldly, illuminating Noah's face, now utterly stiff, written over with astonishment and bewilderment at being outside the plan. The deadly strike he had meticulously planned. He thought he could utterly destroy the opponent's nuclear weapon, but it felt like hitting the most insubstantial air. Not only did the opponent not fall, instead, in a way he couldn't understand at all, calm to the point of being eerie, she admitted it, even brushed it off and deconstructed it. This is not the ending he wanted. This completely deviates from his script. A huge sense of defeat and a fury at having been thoroughly mocked wrapped around his heart like poisonous vines. His hand, gripping the remote, trembled violently with extreme anger, his knuckles emitting a groan of unbearable strain. You're talking nonsense. Noah finally recovered a thread of voice from his immense astonishment. It was hoarse and broken, a frantic bluff that hid inner timidity. Playing tricks. Ethan, don't you? He couldn't finish his sentence, because I had already stood up. My movement was neither fast nor slow. The chair legs scraped the floor, making a faint sound that, in this dead silence, was unusually clear. Didn't look at anyone again. Ignored Noah's near-breakdown scream. Didn't heed the huge tears in Claire's eyes, mixed with fear and a strange hope. Gave no response to the tumult raging across George's ashen face. I didn't look at Lucas's cold eyes that were fixed on me, full of scrutiny, confusion, and deeper probing. I simply turned around calmly, with my back to that enormous screen that silently replayed the images of my death in a past life. With my back to that lavish, frigid dining hall that felt like a huge prison. With her back to those nominal family members, she took a step towards the dining room's exit, the door that led to freedom. Her footsteps echoed in the vast, dead silent space, clear and steady, step by step, neither hurried nor slow, as if merely leaving an unimportant dinner party. Noah's roar stuck in his throat. He stared fixedly at my retreating back, the hand holding the remote trembling violently from extreme anger and helplessness, but it could no longer press the button. The carefully prepared evidence now felt like the greatest mockery to him. Claire instinctively reached out, as if to stop me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, only tears pouring down. George leaned forward slightly, his hand on the dining table suddenly raised, as if about to slam the table. But the movement froze in midair and turned into a deep, inexpressible powerlessness. He looked at that resolute departing back, his expression unbearably complex. Rage, confusion, a hint of panic at being abandoned, and a vast sense of guilt he wouldn't even admit to himself. Lucas stood where he was, his body still taut as a bow, but his sharp eyes were now glued to that figure walking toward the door. The cold scrutiny was replaced by a deeper, almost burning curiosity. A facade? That calm admission that made your heart race, that utter indifference. Who, or what, is this Ethan? No one stopped me. An invisible barrier seemed to unfold around me. All gazes, all emotions, resentment, pleading, doubt, pain were shut out. I walked to that heavy door that symbolized the Johnson family's power and coldness. Reached out a hand, grasped the cool, smooth brass doorknob, gave it a gentle twist. Click. The lock clicked open with a soft sound, exceptionally clear in the dead silence. Then, he pulled it open with force. The cold, free air of a deep autumn night rushed in at once. It carried the scent of plants and the distant glow of a city's lights. Rushing toward me, I didn't pause at all. I didn't even look back once at the luxury, chaos, pain, and absurdity behind me. One step, I stepped over the high threshold, stepping into the darkness and freedom beyond the gate. Behind me, that heavy, ornate door that represented everything about the Johnson family. Behind me, slowly, silently, closed, cut off all the bizarre lights and sights inside, and cut off that absurd script called Ethan True Air. The cold night wind instantly wrapped around the whole body, carrying the sharpness unique to late autumn and the faint astringent scent of foliage. It felt far more real and refreshing than the Johnsons' climate-controlled, expensive scent-perfumed air. The heavy door behind them fully shut out the villa's clamor, chaos, and those suffocatingly complex gazes. The world seemed to fall silent in an instant, leaving only the rustle of leaves in the courtyard as the wind passed through and the faint hum of the mundane city drifting from afar. Freedom, pure freedom, unbound by any shackles. Deep in my soul, that last thread tautened by the system, by the Johnson family, by this absurd transmigration into a book, finally relaxed completely. I stood on the cold steps in front of the villa and took a deep breath. The breath was a crisp sweetness of freedom that pierced my chest. There was no direction, no purpose. In the vast world, there isn't a single place I deliberately want to go. Leaving itself is the purpose. I stepped down the stairs. Leather shoes stepped on the cold, hard granite floor, emitting a hollow echo. Just at that moment, at the side of the villa, the small door leading to the servants' quarters let out a creak as it was gently pushed open. A slightly stooped figure cautiously peered out. It was Martha. She was still wearing that faded, washed-out old apron, holding a plain white large porcelain bowl steaming in her hands. The dim light spilled from the small kitchen behind her, tracing the deep wrinkles on her face and those eyes now full of worry, anxiety, and a profound reluctance. She had clearly heard the earth-shattering commotion in the dining room and had seen my resolute departure. "Mr. Ethan." Martha's voice was thick with sobs, trembling as she called out to stop me. She hurried a few steps forward, but didn't dare get too close. She only held out the steaming large porcelain bowl in her hands with extreme care. Inside the bowl was a clear broth, a plump poached egg resting in it, a few green vegetables, and a handful of distinct, evenly thick hand-pulled noodles. This was the longevity meal of foreign custom. So plain it was almost shabby. Compared to the exquisite delicacies on the Johnson family's table, it was a world of difference. But on that cold, deep autumn night, the rising steam carried a warmth that went straight to the heart. Today is your birthday." Martha's voice choked even more, her eyes rimmed red. "According to foreign customs, you should eat a bowl of longevity meal." She looked at me, and in her eyes there was none of the Johnson family's scrutiny, suspicion, fear, or calculation. Only the simplest concern and reluctance of an elder for a lonely child who has left home. "Eat this bowl, then go." She looked at me almost imploringly, the hand holding the bowl trembling slightly from the effort. The night wind grew colder. It made the leaves in the courtyard rustle loudly. I stood where I was. My gaze slowly shifted from Martha's face, etched with weather and concern, to the bowl of longevity food in her hands, steaming warmly in the cold night. Clear broth, plain noodles, vibrant green vegetable leaves, golden fried egg, simple, without any frills, but more like a birthday than the Johnson family's three-tiered cream cake emblazoned with other people's names. Deep down, some corner that had been frozen for too long and nearly forgotten seemed to be gently touched by this plain warmth. Very light, yet real. I was silent for a few seconds. Then, under Martha's anxious yet hopeful gaze, I reached out my hand. The movement was gentle but steady. Took the heavy, warm white porcelain bowl. The heat transmitted through the bowl's walls instantly chased away the chill from her fingertips. I responded once. Her voice was very quiet. as light as a sigh, melded into the late autumn night wind, yet carrying a calm that comes after the dust has settled. Thank you. A warm yellow halo spilled from the small kitchen window, slanting across the cold steps and forming a little patch of comforting light. I stood at the boundary between light and shadow, holding that simple yet piping hot bowl of longevity noodles. I didn't go inside, nor did I leave. She only lowered her head slightly. The steam rising from the bowl clouded my vision, blurring the outlines of the golden fried egg and the verdant greens. Martha stood awkwardly to the side, nervously rubbing her hands on her apron, her murky eyes unblinking as she watched me with tentative hope. I picked up the equally plain bamboo chopsticks resting on the rim of the bowl. Very old, the edges already worn smooth from handling. I picked up a chopstick full of noodles, each strand separate and distinct, with the resilient chew of hand-kneaded dough. I put them into my mouth. The noodles were warm, carrying the simple scent of wheat. The broth was light, with only a hint of salt and the savory note of lard. The poached eggs' edges were slightly crisped, the inside soft-boiled, the runny yolk mixing with the clear soup and slipping smoothly down my throat. There were no exotic delicacies or complex flavors, only the most fundamental comfort of food. I ate very quietly, also very focused, as if in this moment, the only things left in the world were the bowl in hand and the simple yet genuine warmth on the tongue. The steam from the noodles filled the eyes, bringing a faint, barely noticeable stinging ache. It wasn't sorrow. It was more like the relief and ease that come after a long, arduous journey when you finally set down your burdens and take the first sip of hot soup, tired, yet unburdened. The wind still blew. It lifted a few withered yellow leaves in the courtyard and spun them in little whirls. The distant city lights blended into a blurred band of light in the night. The splendid outline of the Johnson family villa stood silently in the darkness behind me, like a huge, cold tombstone burying a past called Ethan that had nothing to do with me. And I stand here, standing at the boundary between light and darkness, standing on the threshold between the past and the future, eating a bowl of longevity meal from a strange world, yet carrying genuine kindness. Martha stood to the side, watching me take small bites of the meal, watching my calm profile in the rising steam. The tension and worry in her eyes gradually dissolved, replaced by a deeper, pitying relief. She discreetly wiped the corner of her eye. The food in the bowl gradually reached the bottom. The last mouthful of soup, carrying warmth, slid into her stomach. It dispelled the final chill of late autumn. It also seemed to dispel the last bit of gloom in her soul that didn't belong here. I put the bowl down. The white porcelain bowl struck the cold granite step, producing a faint, crisp sound. I'm leaving. I looked up and glanced at Martha. Her voice was still very soft, but compared to just now, it was a few degrees clearer and more certain. Martha's lips moved. She seemed to want to say something, but in the end she only nodded heavily. Her eyes reddened again, her voice choked. Mr. Ethan, you from now on, take care. I acknowledged with a sound. For her, and for this world. Then, I turned around, no longer looking at the warm kitchen light, no longer looking back at the silent, cold mansion. His gaze moved toward the villa's courtyard, to the tree-lined path shrouded in night that led off into the unknown. The halos of the street lights blurred in the distance, like a line of silent guides. The night breeze brushed his cheek, carrying the scent of freedom. I took a step, down the final step of the staircase, onto the courtyard's cold stone pathway. Silhouette quickly melded into the deep night outside the door. Steady footsteps, no looking back.